you're going to hear some really interesting ideas today from two speakers that are going to tag team it, and it's going to start with Jim Hockaday, and Jim is going to introduce Mike from CT Consultants. But I wanted to say a few words about Jim, because when I first arrived on this job, I remember he was working in Geneva on the Lake, and we had this. I never expected to have this incredible discussion with this guy that had, you know, this unbelievably state-of-the-art understanding of not just geographic information systems, but this guy understood the power of data, information, and planning, all these things. And I just said, wow, because I was just totally impressed. I still am, Jim, by the way. But I really respect that about you a great deal. Jim is a native of the Columbus area, and as many of you know, he is the city manager for the Conneaut, the city of Conneaut. He previously served as the administrator for the village of Geneva on the Lake. He's a graduate of Muskingum College, where he received his BA in political science and public affairs, and he has a master's degree from Miami University in political science, and he is ABD. Anybody want to venture a guess of what ABD means? All right. From Miami as well, and who knows? Maybe he'll add that FUD to his name here soon. When he was at Miami, he did a lot of interesting work, and I can relate to the work he did for the Center on Public Management and Regional Affairs, because he had a lot of influence. He and I actually worked with some of the same communities in southwestern Ohio. And they speak highly of you down there. But it's it's really an honor to have Jim and Mike share their thoughts on this really important topic that I'm sure will bring down to earth, so that all of you can be enriched and can go home and work with your own GIS system. So with that, welcome Jim Hockaday.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction. I'm not wearing my jacket because it feels like it's 900 degrees in here. It's a great, beautiful fall day. The first thing that I want to start with is congratulations to all the newly elected officials after last night's election, and congratulations to all the communities that were able to pass levies and help support their community. Obviously, Conneaut had a big one on last night. With an additional police levy, and it was something that was very, very, very deeply needed for our community, so we're appreciative for that. This title, and I didn't come up with this title, I didn't do my homework, and my wife came up with this title, and this sounds like a dentist appointment to me. She did her best, but one of the things that Mike Foley with CT and I talked about is, having done this for a long time, having taught courses and classes and done GIS presentations before, is, you know, the first thing we always start out with is, you know, what is GIS? And you know, it's a tough thing to quantify. You know, it becomes kind of a lecture, and that's really not what we want to do. Is we're trying to make this a little more relatable to understand the impact that it can have on our community, and why we need something like this. And if you can't hear me, and because I'm not holding this close enough, just raise your hand or something. But Mike and I kind of have been through this a bunch of different times, and we're trying to kind of broaden the scope. How many people here have been to the auditor site and looked at the parcel data and all that kind of stuff? I mean, so it's a fairly accessible program, and it's a wonderful thing. And this, to give the county auditor's office some credit here, is they had a CAD system before that, and CAD, for as strong as it is, certainly was not as user-friendly and didn't have the relational database power, kind of techie wonky abilities that ArcMap has. So it's definitely a big kudos that they transitioned to the system that they're in now, because it's a much more powerful platform. It occupies 90% of the marketplace when it comes to mapping and relational databases. Mike's going to cover all the kind of techie stuff. I'm going to cover the more soft conceptual stuff here. And I'm going to go ahead and get moving because I tend to talk too long. So I see Steve Service, a former council member, nodding his head. Yes, that's correct. So um, anyways, so how I want to approach this is it's a tool, and people tend to overstate what GIS can be, that it's this panacea, silver bullet that solves all our problems through technology, and that's not really true. It is a very powerful tool if used appropriately. It can accomplish some pretty significant things that we have not been able to accomplish in this county and many other counties. So I don't want this to be kind of a triumph of technique over purpose, conversation. This is a purpose-driven kind of conversation. So I want to talk a little bit about, and this isn't about the city of Conneaut, though. I can use examples. I could use examples from Geneva on the Lake. I can use examples from other areas. And we could pick anywhere, probably in the Midwest Rust Belt state, and I could have the same conversation. Unfortunately, we are not unique. A lot of these things they're not identical, but they all certainly rhyme in each of these communities. So we can talk about it. Our communities, when we talk about their infrastructure as it relates to our ability to do economic development, to do all these things. Actually, may have clicked past the slide in there. No, I didn't. But essentially, the whole concept here is that when we look at our communities, what are our communities made of? Obviously, we have police and we have fire and so on and so forth. But we're providing essential services for our communities that are not provided through some private entity that would otherwise provide them. We provide, you think about it, 90% of the resources that you touch from government are not coming from the U.S. federal government. It is not coming from the state of Ohio. It is coming from your county, your city, your village, your township, whatever local polity that is providing that. That's your streets, your police, your fire, your drinking water, your wastewater. In some cases, your electric. In some cases, your gas. In some cases, some very, very essential things to your daily life, your libraries, your schools. All these things are provided by local government, and you start tallying up their assets of what they're actually comprised of, and start counting them: lane miles of road, miles of sanitary sewer, and so on and so forth. And these things are huge. So if you want to look at the city of Conneaut this way, we have roughly an all funds budget around $13 million. But when you start adding up the assets, you're probably close to about $500 million in assets laying out there across 26 square miles. So this is pretty serious stuff. I mean, this is big stuff, and we start looking at it, and we start putting it in the context of where we are as a community, as a county, and like I said, it's interchangeable in the name, but we're overbuilt and we're underserving. Most of these things were built for a larger population in the 1950s, the 1960s, sometimes earlier than that, 30s, 40s. You look at Ashtabula City; they used to have a population of about 50,000 in 1950. Their land mass, with the area they were serving, was about half the size of what it is now. But now, twice the size, and they have 19,000 people. You look at the infrastructure there; their infrastructure is sprawled, it's grown, and you have less people to pay for it. You have infrastructure now that's 80, 100 years old, and it's falling apart. That infrastructure doesn't owe us anything. So it's overbuilt, it's underserving, it's aged, it's been poorly maintenance. Our budgets are tight. We can't get that stuff done. It's limited capacity, and it limits our development opportunities. We are married to this infrastructure. We are married to all these things that we have. And when we go to talk about new opportunities, sometimes it's not there because of the infrastructure that we have. Our decision making is not data driven. Usually it's, what's our budget for next year? Well, what did we do last year? We'll make some changes at the margin. This is what we have. We're resource driven rather than decision making driven based on data and information about the reality of what we have. We tend to be very low tech. We're still paper based. We're still, you have a big map. We have a reactionary stance forcing non-strategic investments. And I'll kind of go through these a little bit. And then we have limited budgetary capacity. I mean, all these things are true. That could be in a community in Ashtabula County, probably in the Midwest. So I want to be clear about a couple of things. You know, these are all challenges. They're all real, whether we choose to acknowledge them or not. I say we acknowledge them, and so we can confront them. And it's also not intended to denigrate anybody's efforts, past efforts, whatever. I'm not so much concerned as to how we got here, but where are we going to go from here? This is future focused. I'm not worried about what happened last week. I'm worried about what's going to happen next week. So how do we move forward from this? You know, we look at these examples of things no longer being cost effective. Sometimes we can't extend or improve lines because we have so much maintenance or so much crisis maintenance going on in the background. And communities are taking rather dramatic steps to attempt to eliminate that burden. You look at Detroit. What's Detroit doing? They're taking whole city blocks, ripping every piece of infrastructure out of the ground because they can no longer serve it. There's no one there for it to serve, and it's costing them money every day. And we're paying good money after bad to maintain infrastructure we don't even use. So you see this right-sizing of infrastructure. Youngstown is on the same path. You know, Cleveland's probably not far behind here. So we're going to see some of that, you know, where we just have overbuilt infrastructure that we're no longer using or maintaining that served some purpose 50, 60 years ago, and we continue to pay for it. And you go, well, what's the cost? And I'll use one example. What's the cost of an old, you know, sewer line, you know, that used to serve some railroad manufacturer, you know, 60 years ago? There is a cost, because if it's still there, it's leaking water. That water comes into the pipe, and then it goes down to our wastewater treatment plant, and we have to treat it. And there's a fixed cost of treatment per gallon. So even though that railroad manufacturer is no longer there, it's gone, you know, the pipe is still there. And the pipe leaks water, and then we as residents, we as consumers, continue to pay for it. You can do the inverse with water. We can do it with roads. We can do it with stormwater. We can elucidate on all of these examples, but it's not really going to get away from the fact that it's old and it's not well maintained. And it creates budgetary hardship, ongoing budgetary hardship. And you say, well, why haven't we dealt with this? It's because we're always strapped. We're always chasing that last piece of infrastructure we didn't maintain. And then limited capacity. So we'll go back to the wastewater example, and I know everybody loves when I talk wastewater. I talk about it a lot. I don't know why. But anyway, so you have that old train manufacturer or whatever that's no longer there, and it's leaking the water into the pipe. You know, what's the other cost of that? The other cost of that is our wastewater plant, and I can give you Geneva on the Lake examples or Conneaut examples. There's only so much throughput capacity that you can push through a wastewater plant. And Conneaut, on a good day, we can push 10 million gallons. It's rated for 2 million. Geneva on the Lake is about 418,000 gallons, and on a great day, about 1 million gallons can go through that plant. And that's on a rainy, wet day. So if you have the old train manufacturer, and then you have somebody else come in, a new train manufacturer wants to come in and site, they go, well, here's the deal is, you know, I'm going to need 500,000 gallons of capacity on a daily basis. And one of the hardest things to do in my line of work is somebody come into town, say, I want to bring all this economic development, all these jobs, and you say, no, nope, can't do it, don't have the infrastructure for it. And a great example for that was in Conneaut was Alaterra. Wonderful company doing wonderful things, really cutting edge. They needed, you know, between 750 and 1.5 million gallons of wastewater capacity on a daily basis. We don't have that. Our infrastructure cannot serve that. And so the answer was very simple, and the answer is no. We can't serve that level of capacity. You know, Scott Strayer's not here, but, you know, I always use the Crystal Global. Crystal Global wants to come to Conneaut. They're doing, you know, D-plan or whatever, and the answer is no. And because we're not ready for that, we don't have the infrastructure, and they're not going to wait 5-10 years for us to develop that infrastructure to be ready to accept that. So it limits our redevelopment or new development capacity. our decisions are not data driven. We have no current data. And I've come across this everywhere I go. I look at, and I'll pick on my water guys over at Conneaut right now. Our map is from 1999, and it's paper. And all the additions since 1999 on this non-scaled map, so it's not even accurate if you put a scale on it, say this is 1,000 feet away or something like that, is drawn in red pencil. So that is the most accurate information we have as to the location and condition of our water lines. We have 91 miles of water main. And if you had to replace it at $75 a lineal foot, it would cost $36 million to replace just the water lines. That's not including hydrants. That's not including everything else, the street above it that you would have to cut to replace it, all that other stuff. So we don't have that. We don't have a current investment plan or management plan. We used to. When we did the Creek Road Water Tower in Conneaut last year, that was the last item on that current management plan. And our wastewater, we're building a headworks building next year, and that's the last item on the wastewater management plan. They're done. They ran their course. We followed the investment plan, the investment strategy. It got us there, and now we don't have one. So there's an importance and a priority that needs to be placed on that, because how are we spending literally millions of dollars? And it's not just about the current revenue, but it's about the fixed asset that's out there in the field, and that's what everybody tends to ignore, is that capitalized asset that's buried in the ground. And again, low technology. We have a reactionary stance. Higher cost limits our administrative staff and budget. So one of the things that I would put out there is, hey, I get good press in Conneaut, if nothing else. We had a bridge essentially fall in the water out there. Well, what would have been 10 years ago maybe a $50,000 fix or touch up on this bridge wing wall turned into a $300,000 problem. So it's almost a penny wise pound foolish problem that, hey, that turned into $300,000. So we're kind of throwing good money after bad, because we don't have a way to be proactive and look at the status of all of this stuff and be forward leaning in it. In limited budgetary capacity, I always joke, for $30 million I can make this all go away and we won't have any problems. But that's not reality. There's no ability for these communities to take on more debt than they have right now. And I could tell you, Geneva on the Lake, the Conneaut, I could use ACDS as an example. We're up there. We're maintaining our infrastructure to the best of our ability. We always have to debt borrow. It's smart, because a lot of it's 0% interest loans. You're spacing those huge capital improvement costs. Geneva on the Lake's wastewater plant is in the neighborhood of $7.5 million. For a small community with a $1.5, $1.8 million budget, that's a huge chunk of change to swallow, but it's going to serve that community for 40 years. The headworks facility at Conneaut is going to be approximately $2 million. We have to consistently invest, and you have these massive outlays of capital that you have to put out there. So to do this without a plan, to do this without any cognition of what's going on, is a dangerous thing. So here we are. We don't have great data. We don't really know where all our assets are. We don't know what condition they're in. And they're huge. We have 565 miles of lane miles of road in Conneaut. That's enormous. 35 miles of stormwater. I don't even know how many catch basins or pieces of infrastructure are in there. I don't have that answer for you. Wastewater. Obviously, we have a treatment facility, over 800 manholes, 60 miles of collection systems, 6 lift stations. Seriously, that's like $200 million worth of infrastructure right there. And we don't have an accurate layout to that. We do. Wastewater is probably a little stronger than the rest, and we have some good paper records. But to look it up would take 3 tables for all the paper and lay it all out and find it, and take 20 minutes of staff time to locate it. Water, I mentioned water a little bit. I mean, it's massive. I think there's 734 hydrants. Not sure how many don't work. We're in the process of doing that this summer. And so here we are. How do we take that next step? And it's hard to explain this, but each one of these elected officials in this room, each one of the city managers around the county, township trustees, at some point they confront this and say, I just started last week. I don't know. I just showed up, and this is what we're looking at. How do we begin to make choices and move forward? Again, let's not worry about how we got here, but how do you get your arms around this, and what can we use? And really what I do is I point to GIS as that solution because it can do that. And the reason we do that is we will go through, we will map this, we will grade it, we will analyze it, and we move more towards what's called asset management, where we have a known ledger of all our assets. We know what condition they're in. And when it says, okay, time to focus on wastewater, we're trying to get the inflow and infiltration, the leaky pipes out of our system, which ones are the worst? It goes from, I have no idea, we have this problem, to right-click sort. And that can't be overstated because that is absolutely true. And Mike Foley, who's kind of co-presenting, and I know I've probably gone well over my time ledger here, is going to talk a little bit more about the technology aspect of it. And one of the things that I'd point out about Mike is he's done this for a lot of communities, and I think it's Willowick on their stormwater. Is that correct? And they are actually ordered by the EPA because of the massive flooding issues. They did not have their arms around their stormwater issue, and they were ordered to basically put this system in, more or less. I mean, not necessarily GIS, but to control the issue. And there aren't very many solutions to this other than going to a GIS platform. So Mike Foley is a GIS specialist with CT Consultants, and I've worked with him on a couple of things. I'm hoping that we're going to be going through this entire mapping system. It's in our budget, presented and proposed in our budget this year to put Conneaut through this. I've done some of this with Geneva on the Lake. We did management plans for their wastewater facility, their I&I analysis. I mean, so this is something that is done and doable. And Mike is probably one of the better guys in Northeastern Ohio. You don't run across a lot of GIS people, kind of like unicorns in a sense that there aren't a lot of them. And he is a graduate of University of Toledo and Cleveland State, correct? And he's a member of the APA, EURISA, American Waterworks Association. You've been doing this for 20 years, 15. Okay, so Mike knows his stuff, and he's an excellent GIS guy, way more expert in this stuff than I am. So I'm going to turn it over to him to show you some of what this does. But again, I would not understate how powerful this can be in transforming the way our communities can move forward. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mike.
Good morning. Hey, as Jim mentioned, I'm Mike Foley. It's a pleasure to be here so I get accustomed to the microphone. Again, I'm a GIS specialist with CT Consultants. I spend a lot of time working with small communities, sub 20,000 population. And the last 15 years, the barriers to entry to these systems have been very high. It's been technology, it's been the ability to host data, and it's been staff. So, our goal as an advisor for a lot of these communities has just been to develop strong infrastructure-based data. Fortunately, in Lake County and Ashtabula County, Conneaut County, they have a very strong GIS backbone. So there's a lot of available public data. And just to kind of satiate Jim, I really wanted to include this slide because there's some familiar faces in here, and I think they realize how difficult it is to get by without having this slide. So ultimately, the brief technical definition of GIS is it's a system of software, hardware, and data combined to create readily accessible mapping and give you the ability to visualize your data. That's been going on for 20, 25 years. What it really is a tool that makes everything you have accessible and gives you the ability to illustrate it, and also gives you the ability to manage it. And that's really my goal as I build through things. The last 10 years, this kind of stems back to my days in school. I had a cartography professor that gave me this great lecture on spaces, places, and faces. It was an interesting position to take, giving you the ability to understand how to put yourself in the position of your client whoever you're building a map for or a data set for, to realize what they want. And geographically, the space is the box that you're in. It's the county, it's the city, it's the neighborhood. The place is the place of the asset or the infrastructure that you necessarily want to map or show. And the faces are the people that you're working for. Who's your viewer? Who's looking at your data set? And you can even take it a little farther. And what are the facets that I want to illustrate to get this across and give them usable data? This is also one of my great throwbacks to my 97 cart book on layers. That's one I use still traditionally. It's a traditional GIS layering system. And we'll get into a more practical you are here view here in a second. But you have the ability to take information like political jurisdictions, subdivisions, cadastral or parcel information, centerline information, aerial photos, existing construction drawings, maps that you already have, and overlay them over each other. And that's a key component of GIS and remains that way. This is my new you are here concept that I'm going to suss through here this morning. This is a simple intersection. You don't necessarily know where it is yet, but I'll tell you it's in Venango County, Pennsylvania. Short of being an aerial base map, if you put yourself right there at the intersection of these two roads, I have a laser pointer. You have a limited amount of information right now. You're on planet Earth, but you're not really aware of the space you're in. So we can start adding public data. And for Venango County, they also provide some auditor information. So we have some parcel data. And now we can see, hey, we've got kind of a jurisdiction. We're now in Cranberry Township, Pennsylvania. And we have some relatable property information. Like, here I am. I'm next to this address and this parcel owner. The challenge at CT is to get beyond that with communities because they're similar to Jim. They had limited control on their asset. They had about 1,000 hydrants and valves and 35, 40 miles of water line that they needed to manage that's between 65 and 70 years old, and they had no idea where it was. So we were able to go locate valves and hydrants, and that becomes another layer as you build through. And the question becomes, how do we make it something else? And so you get to use existing record drawings and data from the township to really begin to attribute the layers. Now all of a sudden, you're sitting at that same intersection, you have the ability to make a decision on your asset, ability to make a decision on what you're using, where you want to go, and not just being a map, it's all dimensional. I mean, it's scalable. You have X, Y, Z, you're able to locate yourself, do dimensional work, and start beginning to build plans based on the data you're collecting. How old is my water line? How old is this hydrant? What type is it? Is this an isolation valve? Is it a hydrant valve? Those are decisions that they were never able to make. In fact, most of the time, they didn't even know where their system was at. When we talk about data, traditionally we talk about data that's available to municipalities through the county, through the state agencies. And I know Ashtabula County does a good job of providing a lot of its public access information to client communities as they need them. So does Lake County, and Cuyahoga County does as well. So no matter what you think, and this isn't a map joke, you're never nowhere. I mean, you always have a position to start at. You're always a spot on the map. It just becomes, and this is my little corporate vamping moment, it becomes the next part where you start building additional data for additional services you want to provide. At CT over the last 20 years, our primary focus has been, utility, but as you move into communities, you find that you're serving departments, EMS, building, zoning, because everybody needs spatial data. It's there. It's available. It's necessary to begin planning. And I think Jim pretty much well covered the benefits of GIS. This is a list that hasn't changed for 20 years. Mapping will always remain a significant component. Now, times are changing. Paper maps are going away. We have the ability to view them digitally and take them with us on our smartphones and tablets. But, it's the best way we can access the data that we're having built. I'm going to walk you through just kind of a typical build-out of a community like Conneaut. And I purposely used old slides because this hasn't changed in 15 or 20 years. When you walk into a community with limited infrastructure access to their information, you're left with old record drawings. And I think Jim mentioned one of the greatest banes of my existence are large-scale atlases with non-dimensional red pencil marks. Now, it's fine because if you get an opportunity to go out and locate them, and we do a lot of survey, you have a physical location. But 9 times out of 10, that's an additional cost. You end up doing this from paper records initially, and then going back and filtering the data and making it tighter as time goes on. well, you might have a map with a red line on it. Typically, the person who put it on there is no longer working there. It might have been 25 or 30 years. So there's a kind of a hierarchy to order of records. We're always working backwards to go forwards. So it's very reductive in building these utility networks. So this is a great example. These were some from about 19 years ago. This was in Worthington, as everyone was working in the Columbus area with Esri back in the day to help develop these massive data sets before they became the child of GIS data in Ohio. We began working simply with base maps and georeferencing these plates in to start building the parcel fabric. And then again continuing to georeference and digitize sanitary and storm information, a process which hasn't changed. In limited communities where you only have basic GIS data, and basic in the sense that it isn't detailed on the level of existing utilities, you're still building them one-off, point-to-point, line-to-line, attributing every feature, type, diameter, material to give a city manager, a service director, the ability to query this information and find out what they have. This is really our reality now. Most of the time you begin with existing shapefile or data that comes from engineering firms, other government agencies, where you're doing a lot of connecting the dots and a lot of attribution. Primarily you're working like on a desktop and attributing data fields with the current information that you're looking for the utility. And it still continues to become just a queryable system. So once you've run through and built the data, you get the ability to start querying and accessing the information you have. This is what I talked about in collection, especially in communities which have very, very, very poor records. We find ourselves doing a lot of conventional survey, and that's the catch basins Jim doesn't know about, the sanitary manholes, the water lines, the service connections. You can only do so much from paper records. Inevitably, if you want to restrain or control the asset you're trying to develop, you have to know where it's at. And so these physical locations are critical to making this a fully functional management tool. And over the last 10 years, as we kind of suss through, how do you use it? How do I access it? 10 years ago, we were delivering spatial data on grid atlases. Server side wasn't available. So it's now available, but it's still an expensive barrier. So for a lot of small communities, it's still coming down to a paper atlas or an atlas grid book, and plus their data to be hosted on their local network. But as we move forward, we have opportunities, like in North Canton shares data with Stark County. Maybe that's a possibility in the future that somebody is able to access mobile information. Right now, our best deliverable, especially for the guys on the street, is still going to be the paper atlas grid. It just works on a better scale. The city of Willowick is kind of what Jim wanted me to highlight. They had some pretty significant stormwater and sanitary issues. They had a lot of detailed flooding that needed to be dealt with. And as part of developing a hydraulic model, an engineering hydraulic model, we had to develop a two-utility GIS system. We had a pretty base budget of about $40,000 to take this from nothing to generally complete. And that goes beyond locating the storm and sanitary system. It also meant developing like specific hydrographic layers, or worrying about the water, or worrying about the flow, and worrying about how it would fit into a model. This was the city of Willowick in November of 2014. And I tried to keep it really simple. There was nothing there. There was no information short of what the county was able to provide, which was principal parcels, center lines, right away. Zero utility information. So we had a lot of things to deal with. We had 51 miles of storm, about 2,500 structures, 42 miles of sanitary, around 900 sanitary structures, and about 45 lane miles of pavement that they wanted to begin relating into a system. Because short of doing the engineering analysis, this had to be something scalable for them in the future. They wanted to be able to utilize it to, manage their utility going forward. This is January 2015. So it's a post-populated database of storm and sanitary, hydraulic flow grids, drainage fabric. We've created variable drainage districts, all built from the generalized spatial data that we collected over that time period. while this is a little more detailed and isn't necessarily where you need to be if you don't have a system yet, the thing that came out of it that I think is my favorite component for the city of Willow was this. From a public works perspective, there's always been this one sticking point for me, and it's managing roads. It's potholes and road programs. You know, it's an expensive component that never gets done. They end up being political by ward, whose street gets done, what year it gets done. And it's a pretty simple thing that a lot of communities have done before, but they were finally able to spend the time and the resource to do a road rating and review, and then just code them with a specific number, a PCR rating, so they could actually find out for the first time ever what condition their roadway system looks in relationship to each other. And so as of 2015, just about a month ago, this was the first time they'd ever seen what condition the roads are in relation to each other and how they're going to go ahead and plan a pavement system for next year. And this kind of gets into the beauty of GIS, which we've kind of shied away from, which is talking specifically about technology. I mean, I'm showing you a simple spreadsheet, but it gives us the opportunity to relate data. So while we've built all these wonderful management data systems, it's the power of a geodatabase, which is an Esri or GIS-specific aspect that allows us to create relatable classes that work with existing data, like specifically this roadway information. And then it's to Jim.
So we spent a lot of time talking about utilities and stuff like that, and the impact that it certainly has on us as municipalities and our cost structures and how we're able to deliver those services, being cost effective moving forward. But it really comes down to this, and while it becomes this somewhat Byzantine argument about utilities and their management and so on and so forth, it boils down to economic development. We are expending so much of our resources maintaining aged and antiquated resources. We're depleting ourselves in such a way that we aren't able to focus on how we grow. And we're not ready. So use this example. You go to the City of Hudson's website. You can go there and you can actually download all their GIS layers. But one of the things that you can do is, say you're a new business and I'm looking for a retail space with a 6-inch, sanitary connection, but at least an 8-inch high pressure water connection. You could actually search that out on theirs, and you would know within minutes whether or not there's a site available within the City of Hudson or not. We don't have that ability here. You still have to pick up the phone and call someone. It's like traveling. It's like traveling or booking a hotel room. How many of you go online only to do your accommodations and stuff like that? Businesses are the same way. Do I want to pick up the phone and talk to someone and have 27 meetings and conferences and so on and so forth? Or do I want to just go online and see if they have what I need or not? And then I can pick up the phone and start the next step on the conversation. There are so many other things that you can do with this stuff, and this becomes the base data. The technology allows it to be possible. And if places within the entire Rust Belt Midwest are going to survive and be competitive with other areas in the country, they're going to have to invest in this technology, and they're going to have to start moving forward in a more programmatic manner, because we will lose out to other areas and other economies within the United States and overseas if we can't get this under control. So it's not just about a cost aspect or anything like that. It relates back to our base competitiveness as communities. And if we're going to continue to be competitive, we're going to need to address these challenges. And there are very few tools other than this that can do it so well. So thank you, and have a wonderful morning. Sorry, we probably took longer than the time we were allowed, it said. And yeah. So Mike is going to answer all the questions. No. So do you guys have any questions? I mean, we do have some GIS people. The county auditor's office is probably the most familiar with it. And A lot of these are simple questions. Have a business asking to site in a specific area, and the first thing they're going to ask about is access to utilities. And different utilities have different, they just operate differently. Wastewater relies primarily on gravity because it has to go downhill. So knowing the depth of your system, and they say, hey, I want to, move out to the fringe here and build this new building, if it takes me a week and I have to call the engineer and have them come out, or I got to call my wastewater guys to go find out what we even have there to get them back the most basic of responses. We are just so slow. We are positioned so poorly to be able to respond to business. And I think those of you who are in businesses, you understand you can't wait weeks and months and years for these responses. That you need them. Hey, can we go or not? Can we do this? Can we expand? Can we, and the more government can position itself to be user friendly to development is important, and this allows us to do that. Well, each community, I mean, and all great questions. Obviously coming into Conneaut and off the bat, trying to learn a municipality, and it really is that you try and learn it, you try and understand everything that's there. You ask for all these documents up front, and of course you try and identify where they are and what it is and what condition it's all in, and and I will use a Conneaut specific example here. Is my first question was, okay, we basically don't have anything. So what's it going to take to do that? So I started there April 20th. I think by May 1st, I had already called CT and said, I want a proposal by July 15th to digitize this entire collection. In our case, it would be approximately $40,000, and that would be roads, stormwater, sanitary, and water. So each community is going to have a different cost. Now, say $40,000. Wow, that's a lot. The management plans and facilities, for each one will probably be in the neighborhood of $50,000-$60,000 for a facility management plan, which is your investment strategy for the next 20 years on your utility based on anticipated demand. So you look at it all told. I think I'm less than $200,000 on all this planning. Why expend that? If I have to do a sewer line on probably the shortest street in Conneaut, it's going to cost me more than $200,000. So you start putting it in there. How can you afford not to have this information? And well, so in Conneaut's budget, I can pretty much fit it in. I may push back a small project a year, and what I'm also doing is I'm doing it on a 13-month timeline. Allows me to spread it across 2 budgets. So I think it fits right in with, I have the available resources to do this. As far as the staffing, we don't have tons of GIS people sitting in the wings. In fact, I'm probably the only one. So that's been the bigger challenge, and it's been the bigger challenge in the past because that is one of the chief barriers to entry is you have to have developed users. I'm actually looking at a company that Mike kind of pointed me to called MuniLogic. They're actually an engineering firm in Pennsylvania, I believe, and they basically host it in a similar, for a very, very small fee. They host that data, and you just go into a website and log in, and all your data is right there. And so I could have my water utility guys, if they have the equivalent of what a police officer has with a laptop with a 4G connection, they can go in and they can look at the map in real live time and actually work in the field from a tablet or so on and so forth. So it has become tremendously more user friendly. You do not have to be a GIS user. And we did the raise your hands. Are you guys all GIS users? You are, because you go to the auditor's site and you look at his information, and you are in fact a GIS user. So it's about being able to present it in that user-friendly, consumptive format, and it's there. And 10 years ago, the answer to that question would have been very different. Bert. Well, it depends. It depends on who owns. So when you call Oops, we get a little ticket from Oops, and they say, "Hey, go mark your water line. Hey, go." So then you have a city employee come out and mark the water line and the sanitary line, and then the gas company and electric company comes out and marks their own. So it's really just a notification system. It doesn't actually have any of the data in it. Oops is literally calling the owner of the utility saying you need to come mark up your asset out there. Well, no. You would still need to call Oops. It's just we actually know when we get out the field where our line is. So I always used Fred, and Fred was an employee of my team on the lake. It was always like, when Fred retires, we're not going to know where 90% of our stuff is. And it's true, and it's true to this day, that there are people that have been in our organization for 35 years, and they've dug up that water line, and it's the only reason they know it's there. And because they remember it, they installed it. Ed Spoor with ACDS would be one of those guys. You know, if he leaves, heaven forbid, my gosh, you won't know where any of your stuff is, because it's not accurately on a map. So you rely on that institutional knowledge embodied in your employees to be able to mark those up. And strikes are very expensive, not to mention dangerous. Bob. And sure. There, yes and no is the answer to your question. For instance, other entities aren't going to care about the City of Conneaut's water utility. The ability to work together is on the overhead cost of having the server, paying for the internet connection, because this obviously is incredibly data intensive. So the auditor's office has a very expensive set of servers. They also have, 2 GIS folks? You have Tammy and Jim Branch. Yeah, so, they've already invested in those resources. They have the huge internet connections, so they can serve all this, so we can all every day get on there. And, I don't think I ever log off the auditor's site. So, that investment can be brokered. So if Conneaut does all of this stuff, they have all this map, I could easily share that information with Roger's office, and then Roger could choose to, display that as a sub-layer or not. So when you're zoomed in on the City of Conneaut, you can toggle those layers on and off. It could be zoning maps. Even within the county body itself, they have tremendous wastewater and water assets in ACDS. Janice Schweitzer in the Community Planning and Service Division, obviously they have all of the zoning maps and so on and so forth. Those could all be digitized and placed on that server. But I think Roger's point would be that it also doesn't happen in his office for free, and he's had to outlay some pretty serious capital to even make this happen. So that cooperation is based on, can those other entities also contribute to carry some of that cost? So it then becomes a political question of, can we share this resource, in an equitable fashion and come to an agreement. So yes and no, but nobody else can create the data for Conneaut. Conneaut's got to do that for itself. Yes. Mm-hmm. It's been really bad. But it is getting a little bit better. So we have the big gas line project going in, and that's a 12-inch intermediate pressure main that is immediately adjacent to some of the city's infrastructure as well. I will, at the end of that project, not get any as-built drawings to the location of any of their assets. And that is actually due to Homeland Security rules. I can't know where it is. However, it's a little bit dangerous to be digging around out there without that, and of course we call them in and bring them in on it. So that's there. But really, like Dominion, and I'll use Dominion because they're the major service provider here, is they haven't gotten onto a serious replacement program and digitization of their entire system until recently. They had the tremendous issues over in Fairport Harbor. And it exposed some major deficiencies in their system. And they've subsequently reinvested. They're in the process right now of doing a capital improvement program of $200 million a year within their entity. And they're trying to now, for the first time ever, project out 5 years, what lines are we going to replace? And that gets back to Bob's point of, can we work together? And so for the first time ever, they're kind of coming to you and saying, we're going to be replacing on these streets. And then we have the opportunity to say, well, if we have our assets, we hate to have, I'll use the gas line project. Those people are going to hate me because we've had 2 bridges out, we have a gas line going in, and in 2019, I'm ripping the entire street out. So for the next 6 years, that section of 20 is going to be under construction and nobody's ever going to be happy. That is an example of what's always happened in the past. I'll use an example of a different street, Orange Street in Conneaut. I have a water line replacement going in there. The gas is now informed me they plan on doing that next year as well. So within 1 year, I'll be able to do water, sewer, stormwater, and gas, hopefully stormwater, all in one shot. And we will be able to come in, come out, and all those services will be restored on that street, and then we can leave those residents alone. But there is absolutely nothing more embarrassing than paving a street, and 2 weeks later you see the water utility or the gas utility out there with the saws cutting a perfectly paved street, because they never are the same after you cut them. They aren't. I don't care what anybody tells you. They aren't. So it's getting better, but it has not been a great relationship in the past, and they suffer from all the same problems that the public entities suffer from. Is sometimes they don't know where their assets are. A lot of their infrastructure is very old, very dated, and if you had maps, I think they'd be on like rice paper. They're that old. I didn't realize, but I think there are 20 lines in Conneaut that belong to Dominion that are actually wrought iron. They're a wrought iron gas line. I didn't even know that was possible, but they go back to the 1880s. They're that old, and they're now on that replacement schedule with Dominion. So for the first time ever, we're kind of starting to take these steps, and the same is true with First Energy. I'm kind of picking on Dominion, but they're starting to move forward with that.
If not, please join me in thanking both Jim and Mike.